Woof! Good morning and welcome to a special edition of Muttday Morning News. I'm the titular Mutt Fen. Now let's get to some news. I hear you already. Hey, it's not Monday. What gives? Well, there was so much news last week, I suspected I'd have to do an extra show. Then some of the stories I'd covered on Monday started to develop more. And finally, I wanted to provide some advice before any of my viewers potentially take part in a No Kings protest this weekend. Don't worry, I'll be starting with that bit first. So let's get to it. To be frank, some of the folks spreading information for protesters are, at worst, Fed posting, sharing information that will get people hurt, arrested, or simply more easily documented. And I'd like to prevent that where possible. As an example, no, do not barking sit down at a protest. Best case, you'll be in the way. Worst case, you'll be trampled and at the perfect height to take a tear gas canister to the head. There's a great thread by Sheryl Weikal, a lawyer out of Illinois. I've linked in the description for those who prefer a written format or just corroboration of my points. Please check it out. Don't worry, it's a Blue Sky thread, not X, so you don't need to log in to read the whole thing. If you're in LA particularly, please be aware that the City of LA and the LAPD are jointly seeking an emergency overturn of the injunction issued last month, blocking police from brutalizing and arresting journalists, explicitly citing tomorrow's No Kings event as justification. As for the direct tips, first up, documenting a protest is not a bad thing, but make sure to avoid pictures that show protesters' faces. Nearly every protester whose defiance went viral from the Ferguson and BLM protests turned up dead with little to no investigation. Second, and this is a bit of advice that made me want to write this, please do not wear swim or ski goggles. Ski goggles will do little if anything for tear gas or pepper spray, and while swim goggles can help with those, the bubble of higher air pressure around your eyes can cause them to become unseated from the socket if you're struck. Go for actual safety goggles, rated either for impact or chemical exposures. Personally, if you can get one in time, I recommend a full face respirator, especially if, like me, you wear glasses or contacts. As an aside, if you wear contacts, don't wear them for this. I promise you do not want to experience tear gas with contacts in. And I'm saying that as a masochist who fell asleep during my ribcage tattoo. If you can't get a full face respirator, half face still works great. Paint masks like this are rated for the same levels of pathogen protections as an N95, while also rated for aerosolized liquids and oils. N95 and KN95 masks are going to be good options, though you should bring backups. They're light and less easy to share, and paper and cloth masks may need replacement, as they can only filter so much tear gas and pepper oil before they're merely holding the chemical irritants against your face. Or you can go in an inflatable suit. No, seriously. I don't have personal experience with this one, but per an interview with the Portland Frog, the air pressure differential between the outside and inside of the suit actually keeps a lot of the chemical weapons deployed by cops and Homeland Security forces out. Additionally, the absurdity of jackbooted thugs pointing guns and chemical weapon launchers at grandmothers, priests, and mascot suits rather effectively defangs the GOP's fashy rhetoric that they're imposing martial law in war-torn blue cities. Most importantly, if you're going to a protest, make sure someone who isn't going knows where you are and have some kind of check-in plan. I mentioned during the regularly scheduled Muttday Morning News that my script outline had a "this should be national front page news" event out of Chicago basically every day last week. So let's get to what those were. The afternoon of Monday, October 6th, an emergency hearing was held as part of the lawsuit journalists from across Chicagoland have brought against the Department of Homeland Security for clear and open violations of their First Amendment rights. The suit's plaintiffs include the Chicago Headline Club, Block Club Chicago, Chicago Newspaper Guild Local 34071, the National Association of Broadcast Employees and Technicians, Communication Workers of America Local 54041, as well as numerous independent journalists, including Unraveled and the People's Fabric, as well as individual protesters and even Chicago clergy who were brutalized by Chicago police and feds. Judge Sara Ellis's initial ruling was that the plaintiffs had shown they had a substantial case that their First and Fourth Amendment rights had been violated by Kristi Noem's DHS forces. When the DHS lawyers attempted to defend agents wearing ski masks and refusing to identify themselves on the ground of doxing, Judge Ellis noted that public status and culpability are key aspects of government work, and that judges face direct threats every day, specifically referencing the July 19th, 2020 attack where Roy Den Hollander, a self-described men's rights activist, knocked on Judge Esther Salas's door, then opened fire when her 20-year-old son Daniel answered, killing him and wounding Judge Salas's husband Mark. In case it need be said, Judge Salas continues to serve as a district judge in New Jersey to this day. Judge Sara Ellis went on to say, that doesn't mean you get to do this job and be anonymous. Ellis was reticent to grant the requested temporary restraining order that evening and attempted to let the DHS find a middle ground on the identity issue, suggesting DHS must already have some form of alphanumeric badge system for the agents. The lawyer for the DHS, Skingileski, did not know and was given until the next hearing on Wednesday to find out from his clients. However, Judge Ellis ended the hearing with a phrase we've been hearing more and more lately. At this point, DHS is on notice. The Department of Justice and DHS did not heed Ellis's warning. Just today, on Friday the 17th, at a hearing over the myriad violations of the temporary restraining order Ellis issued on Thursday, which I'll go over in a later story, Ellis informed the NOAM reps, quote, when I asked for a proposed modification to the TRO regarding body cameras, that wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a hint. It wasn't an area of concern or a topic of discussion. It was an order. Going forward, I expect when I issue an order to the parties will get it done. While I'm mentioning the dangers faced by judges opposing this authoritarian encroachment on our rights, on Sunday the 5th, South Carolina Circuit Judge Diane Goldstein's home was set ablaze, hospitalizing her husband, son, and an unidentified guest. Goldstein was walking her dog on the beach when the fire began and was mercifully unharmed. South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, also known as SLED, Chief Mark Keel, has said there was no evidence the fire was arson, though he also provided no evidence that it was an accident either. Goldstein had only weeks before issued a temporary restraining order blocking an attempt by the state of South Carolina to illegally provide swaths of private voter information to the Trump administration, angering Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Harim Dillian, one of the dozen or so Trump cronies I reported on mere days ago. One thing I'd like to make particular note of with the Chicago journalism case before I move on was a concerning point the DHS focused on in the proposed TRO. Namely, they were openly seeking direct control over who is designated a journalist, while the DHS's argument being that bad actors, like, say, the right-wing streamers ICE keeps taking for ride-alongs, could impersonate journalists in an effort to sow chaos, ignoring, of course, that it's DHS forces who are kidnapping, beating, gassing, and murdering Chicagoans. I want to make this point clear because on the same day, October 6th, though it's only been picked up by USCN mainstream news in the last few days, the Pentagon announced in a 17-page memo that journalists may only publish material approved for public release by an appropriate authorizing official, even if it's unclassified. Any journalists who did not sign the document waiving their constitutional rights to freedom of speech and freedom of the press by October 16th would have their Pentagon access stripped. While one does not need such access to report on the military actions of the U.S. empire, it's still a blatant violation of the Constitution and further attempts by fascists to replace opposing and truthful voices with hagiographers. And while I was writing this script, the Pentagon Press Association announced on October 16th, today, the Defense Department confiscated the badges of the Pentagon reporters from virtually every major media organization in America. Frankly, I'm rather pleasantly surprised that so many journalists still have some scruples enough to not sign that document. I just wish they had them when it came time to fight for immigrants, trans people, and the other marginalized communities under near constant assault by this regime. Back to Chicago, on Tuesday, October 7th, federal judge Jeffrey Cummings ruled that ICE had violated a consent decree when they arrested at least 22 people without warrants throughout Chicagoland at the beginning of the year. While the case only directly covered those 22 individuals, the organization supporting their case, the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights and Organized Communities Against Deportations, say since the case began, they've learned of at least 200 others kidnapped by ICE under the same illegal policy, and that those are just the tip of the iceberg. Judge Cummings ruled that ICE's policy of carrying blank I-200 forms and filling them out after kidnapping residents were indeed warrantless arrests, in clear violation of a 2018 consent decree that had been further extended back in 2022. The policy seems to have been in response to growing awareness that ICE warrants, signed by so-called immigration judges, who are in fact not elected or legally appointed judges beholden to the public or even the law, but DHS bureaucrats with limited qualifications expected to rubber stamp anything set before them, do not carry the force of law, which a judicial warrant does. As such, ICE policy has ceased to even pretend they require warrants before kidnapping someone. Brett Kavanaugh of the Supreme Court claimed, falsely, in his concurring opinion on Noam v. Vasquez Perdomo, the Supreme Court case from September 8th that re-legalized racial profiling, immigration officers may briefly stop the individual and inquire about immigration status. If the person is a United States citizen or otherwise lawfully in the United States, that individual will be free to go after the brief encounter. Judge Cummings, referencing the South Shore apartment raid, countered that claim in his own ruling, saying, "One thing seems clear. ICE rousted American citizens from their apartments during the middle of the night and detained them in zip ties, no less, for far longer than the brief period authorized by the operative regulation. This mutt will further add, citizenship or lack therein should not be the barometer by which we measure the amount of cruelty we allow these people to inflict on our neighbors and fellow human beings. I do not care if the asshole who lives a few doors down from me, who plays a tuba rather loudly and badly, sometimes until 2 a.m., was born here, a naturalized citizen, a green card holder, or even someone undocumented or overstaying an expired visa. It's not his fault the world is the way it is, nor is it mine, nor is it yours, unless you're a billionaire, in which case, yes, it is actually your fault. The night of Wednesday, October 8th, after the second hearing in the journalism case, large-scale protests took over Chicago's Michigan Avenue and eventually winding their way to the foot of the Trump Tower. Speakers included Alderperson Jesse Fuentes, representing Chicago's 26th Ward, who was illegally detained the week prior by federal agents at a hospital as she interposed herself between the agents and a patient, demanding to see a judicial warrant. The two agents refused before handcuffing the elected official, claiming she was under arrest for impeding, then removing her from the building before releasing her. The next morning, on Thursday, the 9th, Judge Ellis's TRO was issued covering the North District of Illinois, blocking federal forces from using tear gas and other chemical weapons, as well as other less lethal weapons against journalists, protesters, and bystanders without clear justification that agents' lives were under active threat. The TRO also forbade feds from dispersing, arresting, or threatening to arrest journalists and protesters without significant legal justification, as well as requiring DHS forces display identification at all times. The TRO has already been violated numerous times, the first and most obvious on Friday the 10th, when masked federal Border Patrol agents tackled Debbie Brockman, a news producer for WGN-TV, to the ground before throwing her in an unmarked van. She was released several hours later. While she's not yet been charged with anything, DHS has continued to claim she threw something at a federal vehicle without evidence. Brockman has vehemently denied those claims as she was waiting for her bus to work. Federal forces continued to instigate violence against protesters at the Broadview processing facility, as well as an incident in Albany Park on Sunday the 12th when feds tear gassed the entire neighborhood after protesters tried to protect one of their would-be victims. Videos of that event and myriad others since, including the one I'm currently playing, posted to Reddit on Tuesday, clearly show feds firing on fleeing families who pose no threat to them in open violation of the restraining order. Also beginning last week, Judge Ellis's TRO theoretically blocking federal agent-instigated violence, as well as another court order to remove the illegal fencing ICE put up around the Broadview facility, which was finally removed late on the night of Tuesday the 14th. Many feds were replaced with local and state police at the processing center, which has become the focal point of Chicago protests. In addition, a curfew order was placed by Broadview Mayor Karina Thompson, only allowing protests between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. The curfew is yet another illegal impeachment upon the rights of free speech, free press, and free protest promised by the First Amendment, but also an effective aid to ICE and DHS's efforts to cause as much human suffering as possible. The reason many were, and continue to, protest the facility before 6 a.m. and after 9 p.m. is that those times are when feds tend to be most active, moving prisoners into and out of the facility. In the face of both orders and the well-founded concern that attempting to exert control over the police, who theoretically serve at the whims of municipalities and state governments, would actually just reveal that the militarized gangs we call cops are, well, militarized gangs. The state and city police have been handed control over the Broadview facility's perimeter. The United Command, pulling from Broadview PD, the Cook County Sheriff's Office, the Illinois State Police, the Cook County Department of Energy Management and Regional Security, and the Illinois Emergency Management Agency designated a tiny area at the corner of Lexington and Beach Street to be the new legal protest area, while closing access to 25th Street. While Governor Pritzker continues to claim Illinois State Police are protecting protesters, apparently by beating and detaining them for no reason, the police presence at the facility has had further unintended consequences. Now that ICE, CBP, and other federal gangs are no longer needed as a show of force at the processing center, they've been on a protracted kidnapping, assault, and chemical weapons spree all across Chicagoland since Friday. I simply cannot cover all the examples here, and would recommend my viewers follow Unraveled Press and the People's Fabric on Blue Sky for a trusted source on what's been going on in Chicago, close to live, or to go check out the Chicago Block Club and the Tribe for more traditional coverage. Also on Thursday the 9th, Marimar Martinez was indicted on a charge of assault of a federal agent. At her arraignment on Wednesday the 15th, she pled not guilty. If you're not sure who she is, well, that's because DHS attempted to hide her name after they shot her 5 times. Marimar Martinez is the woman who DHS claimed was shot after agents were pursued by a, quote, convoy of civilian vehicles before being, quote, boxed in by 10 cars, and who they claimed pulled and brandished a gun on agents before taking herself to the hospital after being shot 5 times. Every single part of their story has been proven to be a lie, but let me show you just a few examples. First, videos from the scene have shown agents driving into Miss Martinez's car, not the other way around. Second, the actual body cam footage, according to the Chicago Sun-Times, who've acquired it but not yet released it to the public, shows the still unidentified feds tell her to, quote, do something, bitch, as they pulled her over before opening fire at Miss Martinez 5 times. Third, no, she did not drive herself to the hospital after a federal agent shot her 5 times. In fact, even before the DHS statement was made, the Chicago Fire Department said they found her near South 35th Street and California Ave, later identified as Big Rig Oil Pros, whose employees called them while using shop rags to try and staunch the bleeding from her 7 bullet wounds, apparently some were through and throughs, and took her to Mount Sinai Hospital. One point I refuse to not make, on October 11th, the Salvation Army delivered pizza to the cops harassing and assaulting protesters at the Broadview Detention Center, mere minutes before a fleet of ISP troopers in riot gear took to the street with clubs and began advancing on protesters, even before the curfew. The Salvation Army are evil. It's really that simple. In the same way that Goodwill and many other Christian outreach programs masquerading as semi-secular charities are. The Salvation Army has not only campaigned against gay rights, they've funded anti-gay and anti-trans legislation here in the US, in the UK, even Aotearoa, as well as maintained openly anti-queer policies, including but not limited to illegally and inhumanely denying queer and especially trans folks from their shelters and referring trans and gay folks seeking their aid to the torture we so glibly refer to as conversion therapy instead. They've also been caught repeatedly illegally proselytizing during secular government-backed social events for the benefit of wider communities. And don't even get me started on their sexual abuse issues going back to the 1940s. They are evil, and just like many other religious charity groups, they're feeding the people putting your neighbors in cages while leaving desperate trans women to freeze to death outside their shelters. The 4 days since the last regularly scheduled Mutt Day have been absurd, to say the least. DHS forces continue to terrorize communities across the US. Just this morning, Friday the 17th, CBS Miami uncovered a DHS agent had been arrested for drunk driving on Thursday. Actually, no, not just drunk driving, but driving against the flow of traffic with hopefully his 7 and 9-year-old children in the car as well. When he was eventually pulled over by a sheriff's deputy, he tried to use his DHS status first to get out of the traffic stop, but when he realized that wasn't working, he instead tried to intimidate the deputy, implying he was Haitian and likely illegal. This next story features videos taken by the folks over at Unraveled Press and The People's Fabric. Please check them out for more up-to-the-minute updates on Chicago. And yes, they're getting 2 plugs this episode. Already this morning, Friday the 17th, we've seen Illinois State Police, in theory under command of Pritzker, assaulting protesters at the Broadview Detention Center. Not to be outdone by DHS forces, ISP seem to have joined in on targeting congressional candidate Kat Abu-Ghazaleh, grabbing her by the feet and throwing her over one of the free speech barricades. Not that those offer any kind of protection from ISP, as Unraveled also grabbed this video of ISP dragging protesters over the barricades. I'll likely mention these next few during the normal Mutt Day on Monday the 20th, but the shutdown of the US federal government by the Republicans has continued to have far-reaching effects I should bring up while I'm here. While the Trump administration continues to pretend laws requiring all federal employees receive back pay for furloughed work don't exist, nearly 1/3 of the CDC has been gutted. The Chicago District Court has announced it's run out of money to pay federal clerks. I don't know if it's possible to stress how big a deal that one is for the concept of due process. And the US Armed Forces are going without pay. But don't worry, DHS forces have been promised their payroll will continue as scheduled, as will the $20 billion bailout to Argentina, though it's now been increased to a $40 billion bailout. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson continues to cower in fear of the Arizona rep he refuses to swear in, Adelita Grijalva. Johnson announced, actually, Catherine Clark, the Democratic whip, announced, because Johnson spent the press conference beforehand answering nearly every question with some variation on, I don't know. What an extremely comforting thing to hear from the man theoretically leading the majority party of the U.S. House of Representatives, that the House will not be in session on Monday, the 20th day of the shutdown, despite previous schedules set by the House GOP leadership. Johnson did clarify, saying he'd bring the House back in session, but only once the Republican-controlled Senate, which has also been out the last week, reopens the government. Kennel me, even the pathetic worm Hakeem Jeffries made a statement attacking the Speaker's cowardice, by the way. Takes one to know one, I suppose. Jeffries said, quote, "It's shameful that Grijalva has not been sworn in because Johnson and House Republicans apparently want to continue to hide the Jeffrey Epstein files from the American people. This has gone on now for weeks, and so it's my expectation if she is not sworn in today, during the pro forma session today, as the Arizona Attorney General has made clear, expect swift and decisive legal action." As an aside, wow, I hate reading Jeffrey's quotes. I swear he adds a minimum of 6 extra words to every sentence. Oh, and before I forget, when asked about the threat of legal action by Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays, made a few days ago if Johnson did not swear in Arizona's duly elected official, Johnson said, "It's a publicity stunt by a Democratic Attorney General who sees a national moment and wants to call me out." Yeah, dude. That's what happens when you keep flaunting your defiance of legal procedures. Like I said of Alex Jones on Monday, I wish you a fun time with the consequences of your own actions. Actually, since I mentioned him, Alex Jones's Supreme Court appeal was denied on Wednesday, so he will still be selling his slanderous media empire to pay $1.4 billion to the Sandy Hook families for defaming them by claiming the shooting was fake and performed by paid actors. As the final story for this special edition, I actually have something unrelated to the shutdown, Chicago, or even the GOP. Remember the story on bills Newsom hadn't signed or vetoed from Monday? Well, it had enough development that I kind of had to fully redo it. See, I made that comment about staying up till 1 a.m. on Sunday night waiting for news on the bill signings, but I forgot. 1, the deadline was sort of floaty between being on a Sunday and being on the day before a holiday the state of California doesn't consistently recognize, but technically the federal government does. And 2, that didn't mean the governor's office would announce what he'd signed or vetoed until Monday. So, after Muttday Morning News on Monday the 13th, Gavin, Trump 3.0 Newsom's office announced that the governor had signed 8 of the bills flagged by the Trans News Network, but vetoed 2 of the most important bills. namely AB 554, the bill which would prohibit Californian healthcare plans from blocking access to PrEP, a drug that has been in use for decades and which effectively prevents the spread of HIV. PrEP is currently provided for free to anyone who wants it by the federal government through a program Trump has repeatedly made threats against. And SB 418, a bill that would guarantee trans Californians the right to a 12-month stockpile of our medicine, which is, let's be honest, something all folks who take regular medication without a shelf life concern should be entitled to. The bill also would have bolstered anti-discrimination protections for everyone dealing with California-based insurers. His logic in both cases being the cost, not to the public or even the state, but to insurance companies. This ignores that the cost of treating HIV infection is significantly more to the state, consumers, and even insurers than PrEP, while the HRT stockpiling bill was an effort to specifically prevent price issues as the federal government continues to threaten bans on healthcare older than heart surgery. On top of the bills I mentioned, he vetoed in the previous story firefighter pay raises, a bill requiring data centers disclose their water consumption, and 3 different bills driving consumer-level reinforcement of California's power grid through rooftop solar and backup battery programs. He also vetoed a bill that would restrict LLM chatbots like Meta AI from being allowed to interact with minors unless the owners of said Azathoth ex machina could prove minors wouldn't be sexualized or convinced to take their own lives by the machines. I bring up Meta AI because, in case you forgot, it was found to be intentionally using a lexicon of grooming language when connecting with children under 8, only back in August. Rutter's link in the description. Newsom's absurd grounds for the veto were that it might unintentionally block all existing AI products from minors. Dude, that's not unintentional. That's the point of the bill, to protect children from the grooming these billionaire-owned chatbots keep getting caught doing. Son of a puppy mill, I was almost done with the special edition when this story crossed my peripherals. Friday morning, AP News reported that not only has the US government made another illegal attack on Venezuelan waters on Thursday, since soft confirmed by Trump and Marco Rubio, believed to be the 6th such war crime, but that this one had survivors, reportedly being held on a US Navy ship. The strike has not been officially announced by the US government. Both the illegal attack and the presence of the prisoners was communicated to AP News by a defense official and a second person familiar with the matter, both under the conditions of anonymity, just in case you thought the Pentagon wasn't going to turn into the leakiest faucet in the US government after that press badge BS. I'd like to think this special edition means I won't feel as much pressure for next week's Muttday, but let's be honest, it's Friday. These fashy fups love going ham during the weekends, and there's those No Kings protests tomorrow. Be safe out there, y'all. I promise. I do have some hopeful and maybe just a bit dumb stories for Monday. The current shortlist includes a thing about merkins, dog walkers, and Magic the Gathering. Those are 3 different stories, don't worry. If you learned something or even just had a laugh, please consider supporting my independent comedy journalism by subscribing here on YouTube, doing all those cursed things that appease the algorithm, and maybe even tossing a few bucks my way on Patreon or Ko-fi. Full disclosure, I currently survive off of about $100 a month between Twitch, Patreon, and Ko-fi, so every bit helps. Also, since I'm still being a spiteful little bitch about that Illuminati comment I mentioned during the normal Muttday Morning news, and I did this whole second scripted video this week, which, yeah, sorry, that's why I haven't posted any YouTube shorts yet this week. This script was 4,775 words. Again, give or take a few for things like dollar signs or places where I wrote numbers numerically, and yet I still had no need for plagiarism. As a reminder, everything that I do is brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you very much to April, Fragile Paper, Pimento, Manfred, Pinball Witch, Yalk, and Rose. I cannot believe I just did that in a wildly wrong order, but whatever. You can support everything I do at patreon.com/Fenn. That's PHENN, or coffee.com/Fenn. Please, every little bit helps. And that's all I got, really. Thank you all so very much. I hope you all have a good day, time, whatever time it is for you all. Bye.